How you doing, my friends? Hope everyone's well on this day. I would imagine if you have the device to watch my video and the time to watch my video, you probably have a home as well. Maybe not everyone, but the idea of homelessness is an issue I've mentioned recently, and I kind of wanted to make a video talking about poverty a little bit and put a little perspective on the issue. The reason is because at least once a year I make a video about my gratitude. It's something I've been doing on my YouTube channel for the last, 8 or 9 years. I make it a point to do it around this time of year because, it's the holidays. Grateful for my family, for my home, and I've struggled in my life too. I know what it's like to take a calculator to the grocery store or to be stressed out about being able to pay bills. But I've never expected any pity in the times that I was poor or when I wasn't making enough. I've always known that to an extent, if I put in a lot more hours and work harder and work smarter, right, is what we're told, then you can get ahead. And a lot of the times that's true. But that's not always available. And some communities don't have the same options as others because of zoning, the way that certain communities were marginalized, because of the historical makeup of the way that our nation has operated. And so I'd like to, I guess I'll give my thoughts on the issue, and I'd really appreciate it if people would leave their thoughts and comments on this, because I'm not quite sure exactly how to feel about the nation's poor. Of course, I feel empathy, but as far as about how to handle it, how to deal with the problem. But I figure with the facts and the figures, we can go from there. I woke up from I was feeling a little bit tired. I don't know if I'm, got a virus or something, but I just felt a little strangely tired in the afternoon today. And I kind of dozed off for a little while. And when I woke up, there was a show playing called Trashopolis. I had been watching one before that, but this one was about Mumbai, India. And I think that's what it was. And the show is fascinating. It talks about how different countries recycle and deal with their trash and what a problem it's becoming. And in Mumbai specifically, how they call them rag pickers, the poorest of the poor, because in India they go by the caste system. And they're, for the most part, they're content with it. The way people talk about the caste system is something that they're just used to in their culture. But there was a quote attributed to Gandhi, and the quote says, "A nation's greatness can be determined by how they treat their weakest or how they treat their poor." Now, of course, whenever I hear a quote from somebody, I research deeply until I can prove that quote probably wasn't that person. And sure enough, I looked deeper, and that quote was never really attributed to Gandhi, from what I can find. But there are 3 or 4 or 5 other quotes along the similar lines. There was a writer or author who said, you could tell a nation's greatness by the way they treat their animals. And I thought that was an interesting look, a way to perceive it. But anyhow, the question, I guess, is, what do we owe the poor? And that's always, as a society, do we owe our poorest citizens anything as individuals? And there seem to be two very distinct lines of thinking on this issue in my nation. One, that we should help the poor as much as we can, because whether it be that's what my religion says, or that's what, that's what feels right in the heart, whatever your reasoning is, generally, most of us feel, a majority of us, I think, from my own interactions with people, feel empathy for those who have less. So we can either say, well, I'm going to help this person and hope that they get themselves out of poverty, or hope that, they can pull themselves up at one point or another, or help them do so. And then there are a lot of Americans, and this is a very a lot of Americans say, look, if you want to get ahead, you have to work hard, and we shouldn't have to give the poor anything because it just makes people lazy. And I want to get to the statistics on that because it's actually a falsehood. But there will always be a few people who take advantage of the system. But the question is, does the overall system benefit our society more? And the amount of money that we put into fighting homelessness, to fighting hunger, it's one thing to say, well, you got yourself into this situation and you're poor and you're at the poverty line. That's just too bad, Well, if a person has kids, I don't think any kid should ever have to go through that, regardless of what mistakes their parents have made. And if we raise a whole generation of malnourished children, during World War II, that happened. A lot of kids were, during World War I and II, when a lot of soldiers were called in, a lot of them weren't able to actually fight and weren't accepted because they were so unphysically fit and so scrawny because they had been malnourished for so long. It's only recently in this nation that we've had as much food as we do. So it's not an issue of really having enough food. That's not the problem. But it is an issue of being able to get ahead. When you're suffering day in and day out, working 2 jobs to pay for your house and your kids. When some people think of homeless people, they might think of the junkie who decided to, they didn't want to partake in society, so they sit in their camp and get high all day, or they drink all day. But when I think of homeless people, I think of the mother in her 20s with 2 kids, sleeping in her car and working in the daytime, just trying to make ends meet. So the social structure it's what causes this problem, It's a matter of us not taking care. And yes, there are racial issues and segregational issues which caused a lot of this poverty. We can't deny it and say, well, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, you've got the same opportunities. Maybe today, but not if you live in a neighborhood where you've been marginalized by your own communities, where you haven't had any resources, or the proper schools or good grocery stores. Or a good wage, good jobs. It's difficult for people. And a lot of the poorest neighborhoods work in the nicer places. It's always been that way. And then once the cities are built by the lower income people, they cannibalize the land where the people live to build more houses. It's just this continual progression. And, there are some very strange jobs people take up from being extremely poor. Like I was saying in Mumbai, it's not just the trash sorters that pick through plastic and metal and even bottle caps. They have these guys called gold sweepers. Now, Mumbai has a major gold trade. India loves gold. So these people are actually sweep in between the bricks in the street and collect the dust, the dirt, and then they process it for little tiny amounts of gold. A month's worth of gold would be I think they got like 2 or 3 grams. It was just insane, or 3 or 4 grams. And what they do is the guys who are the guys who make the gold jewelry, they find out where they live, they go to their house, and then they sort through and sift and actually pan for gold in their wastewater that flows out of their house out in front because it runs out into the street. And look, India is disgusting in that way. There's a lot of poverty, and I'm not going to go into how other people live, but I just say this, that it's not a lot of people want to live in that poverty and live in that kind of filth like a lot of the neighborhoods do, but they're forced into it. They have no option. Even in our own country, in North Carolina, I was reading about this place where there's, a nice neighborhood, and then right across the bridge is the poor area where they dump all their garbage, where they've dumped the toxins from the mills for, dozens of years, and the citizens get sick, and the locals in some of these places, have a 13-year lower life expectancy than in their wealthier counterparts' neighborhoods. That's 13 years. That's a very significant amount of time in a free nation that is supposed to be the richest in the world. But what it is, there's a gentrification of, like I said, the neighborhoods that built many of these cities, where your ancestors came in and they helped to build it up. And now many of these people are in poverty. And sometimes it's not an issue of work, but you get in one accident, and you have to go to the doctor, your medical bills, that's not a choice. I mean, you may be able to decide whether you want to pay to go to college. I don't feel too much empathy as much for somebody who signed up for $100,000 worth of college and is sad because they owe money. They knew that they were going to owe money. But somebody who goes to the doctor from an unforeseen consequence, your kid gets a weird disease, it could be any of us, and it could happen tomorrow. And even though people think, well, I'm living okay, I've got extra money, a little savings, that can go so fast. And So what it is a matter of empathy, really putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and saying, damn, if I was in that situation, I would want help too. And here's one of the most messed up things. Some of the poorest areas with the most overdoses, I'm not going to talk about opioids here, but in West Virginia, it was it has the worst of the opioid crisis in the nation. Why? It's because the makers of not just OxyContin, but various oxycodone and hydrocodone, all these manufacturers of these drugs ship them through the distributors. The distributors ship them to the pill mills, and it just so happened that some of the pill mills were in West Virginia. And over a few years, they had an average of 700, I think it was 700 painkillers per man, woman, and child in that state. Hundreds of millions of them for a state with just a couple million people. And this is what fueled the addiction, the crisis that just flowed out. And so the addiction caused much of the poverty in a lot of these families that were already on the edge, and struggling. And in that case, I guess you can't really blame you can't, if you're going to use drugs. I can't blame the opioid manufacturers for poverty, but we can see how these legal drugs lead to bigger problems than this idea that people who are on food stamps are just sitting at home getting high on illegal drugs. Many of these people have been on prescription drugs for a variety of conditions that they can't control. And pain management is no fucking joke, people. If you've ever had chronic pain, you know what I'm talking about. You'll do anything to get rid of it. And so let's get a little bit of the numbers here, because picturing that somebody lives in poverty their whole life, I don't think is very productive for the cause, because most people are not. In the studies and the statistics that have been taken, 45% of people who find themselves in poverty, 45%, that's getting up to close to half, it only lasts a year or less. So 70% of the people who find themselves in poverty, it lasts 3 years or less. So that's over 2/3 of the people will be just fine if they can just get through that little time. And sometimes that's the time when they need help the most. And they say that only 12% of all people in poverty live that way beyond a decade. And that's not surprising, because we have a nation, many of the people, especially in some of the southern and central states, which have some of the worst regulations and rules to protect their own citizens. They have lower life expectancies, bad birth rates. I mean, the U.S. is falling behind in not just education. We have some of the worst birth rates compared to other countries. You would not believe how far we've fallen on the healthcare and education levels. It is depressing. And it makes you wonder, what is worth preserving in this nation, And I would say the people, the neighbors, each other. We're going to need community gardens one day. The way monoculture is going, and these mass institutions producing all of our food and throwing in flavor packets for, adding sugar and salt to give it a little bit of flavor. I'd like to see us go back to backyard gardening within our neighborhoods and communities. By doing this, there's more than enough food. Homelessness isn't a matter of having a house always. It's having a community. In other words, there are plenty of cities in the world where we would look and it looks like a homeless camp, but those are actually homes for them. So it really comes down to perspective. They say that 4 in 10, 40% of adults will experience poverty for at least a year in their life, from the ages of 25 to 60. So getting up close to half, 4 out of 10 of you watching this who are younger, might experience poverty sometime in your life. And damn, it would be nice to have help. And if we've got family, sometimes we can get help. But what if you have no family? What if you have no friends and all you depend on is your neighborhood and community? And then they just cast you aside. They just sweep up your encampment or kick you out from, the doorway where you're sleeping. Everybody's situation is unique, okay? I know that homelessness is a problem. When I made a video about homelessness and golf courses, turning golf courses into homeless camps, I was joking about, you can't literally do that. It's not going to solve the problem. Opening up more land for people isn't going to solve the problem. But what is the question? Will money solve the problem? And if so, can we save more in the long run by pulling everybody out of poverty in this country who's suffering right now? And I think we can. For example, sometimes a small investment can stop a major problem. For example, the administration right now, the current presidential administration said, oh, we're going to help fund this opioid crisis and we're going to help stop it. We're putting $6 billion into it, right? $6 billion is nothing. It's already cost our nation $550 billion, $500 billion in damages, whether it be health or stealing or other problems within the nation, lawsuits, everything else. That means that we're putting $6 billion in to try to stop something that's costing us $550 billion. Well, it's not much different than the issue of poverty. I said that childhood poverty costs us $1.03 trillion a year. And those kind of numbers are very hard to grasp, but a trillion is 1,000 billions, and a billion is 1,000 millions. So a trillion is a million millions. A million millions. That's how much it costs because of childhood poverty. And the thing is, for every dollar spent to fight and combat childhood poverty, these are just the statistics that, the numbers that that I've read. For every dollar spent, we will save at least $7 in future incurred costs through health care, lost work days, sick days. It's the exact same reason why we need a better healthcare system. People might say, oh, well, that's too much money. We shouldn't be spending that much on everybody's healthcare. And then you think, but will it save us more in the long run? And it does. It has statistically been shown that if a person can go to the doctor when they need help, they can, get things before they get too bad. And preventative maintenance, it's just like in your car. If you can't afford to change your oil until your engine falls apart, it's too late. And this ends up costing our nation a lot. So if it comes down to the economics of it, in other words, if a person can't see the empathetic side of why to help someone else, at least look at the economic side. Because what else is there? It's either money or people, one or the other, because the only reason to not help people would be to say, well, they should get their own, figure out their own way to make money. But it's going to cost us 7 times more in the long run. We're fools. But unfortunately, the people making the decisions, the people lobbying against using funding properly are the ones that know that their time on this earth is short. They want to get their share, get their piece of the pie, get their few $1,000,000 so they can live happily, and other people will consistently, live in future generations with these horrible laws and ideas that are implemented. But more than that, the propaganda that's pulled over the people, that taking care of one another is somehow damaging to our environment, or damaging to our people or our nation. That people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, it doesn't always work that way. If the amount of money that our government used to give to just subsidize farmers, for example, whether they were paying them to destroy their own crops or to not sell their crops, now all that money is going to agribusiness. So even the farmers are going into poverty. These small-time farmers and all of the agribusinesses are sucking up these subsidized funds, which were supposed to help out people like us, which puts more and more people into poverty, the people that were producing our food. So that's all I'm going to mention on this. I don't want it to be a negative thing. I just wanted to get the numbers out there so we can look at things maybe a little differently. The idea that putting a little bit of money now into the issue can solve many problems, or at least ease the burden down the line. I don't know if we can solve the problem, but at least we can make an effort to understand it. Thanks for listening, and have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time.